Hello, Internet, and welcome to this week's edition of 1 Minute Answers from 1 Minute Economics, an edition dedicated to retirement. But before getting started with the 4 questions I have lined up for today, I want to do the following. 1. Ask you for a favor, and it's only something that takes up maybe 5 seconds of your time. I simply need you to head on over to 1minuteeconomics.com and subscribe to my newsletter by typing in your email address there. It's something that only takes a couple of seconds, but it's important because as time passes, I want to build a list of friends of this channel, so people I know I can contact if I have something important to announce or if I've written a new book, stuff like that. I promise I won't spam you. I've sent exactly 0 emails so far in 2017. But again, it's good to have such a list, and I'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe. Number 2, I want to, of course, pick the topic for next week, and the topic for next week is going to be consumerism, so feel free to ask me about just how sustainable our consumerist society is. Feel free to ask me about the economics of consumerism or anything else that's on your mind. All you have to do is write a comment below, and I will do my best to answer your question next week. For today's first question, Killer would like to know how he can be a debt slave if he hasn't borrowed anything. And this is perhaps the trickiest aspect associated with taking on debt. I am referring to the moral hazard dimension, because essentially our current generation, or any generation for that matter, takes on debt today in order to perhaps enjoy a better lifestyle than what we could normally afford, but we do so at the expense of future generations because someone somehow is going to have to pay that money back. Which brings us to situations such as the one you described, in which maybe your grandchildren are going to ask themselves, hey, why do I have to suffer? Why am I at fault? Why do I have to pay for all of this when it's not my debt to begin with? Because you can be the most responsible person in the world who has 0 debt and so on, but it doesn't matter, because if your government, for example, took on huge amounts of debt in the past, then that money needs to be paid back. And since we live in a deeply interconnected society, in one way or another, believe me, you will end up paying that money back. For example, 1, the government will say, okay, we need more money to pay our debt, so we're gonna raise taxes, including, of course, your own. So that's one example of a situation in which you will end up paying for the debt that has been accumulated. Or perhaps 2, the government can devalue the currency, but once again, you will be suffering and therefore paying for all of that because you transact in dollars or euros or whatever you use, and that money will be worth less than it was in the past. So you will pay by losing purchasing power. In the end, I think it's important to see things from a sustainability perspective, and we are not very good at doing that nowadays, because you are 100% correct when it comes to your frustration. It's awful to be a financially responsible individual who does all of the right things, only to notice that society has embarked on such an unsustainable path that in the end, responsible or not, everyone will end up paying. Gandalf has asked the second question for today, and he wants to know if retirement is good or bad for the economy. And a lot of young people have this tendency, especially when complaining about how hard they have to work, about how high taxes are or whatever, they have this tendency of blaming, if you will, the elderly and saying, oh my God, we have to do all of this work, we the productive members of society. And I think this is a dangerous way of seeing things. And I'm saying this not as a human being, but rather as an economist, because essentially, whether we talk about productivity or anything else, it's important for humans to know that they are living in a somewhat predictable world. Even if predictability is only an illusion, it's a good illusion to have. Because humans are, at the end of the day, pack animals, and we derive value from knowing that, okay, I'm a child, I go to school, I finish school, I get a job, I work hard, and then I retire and enjoy life and, have long walks and all that stuff. We derive value and relief from knowing all of these things, and in exchange, we end up being able to focus on life and being productive while we are young. In the absence of a framework that we deem to be predictable enough, it's hard to think about how society would look, essentially what I'm trying to say is that by having systems in place, with retirement being definitely one of those important systems, we are moving beyond the idea of living in a Wild West world where only the fittest survive, where you're only good and only perceived as valuable when you're young and able to work. We're moving towards a society that tries to be more predictable, that tries to be more sustainable. So I believe that all in all, retirement is most definitely a good thing from an economic perspective as well. When it comes to the moral dimension of, looking after your parents, your grandparents, and so on, things are even clearer. But even from an economic perspective, I believe having retirement systems in place makes sense. The third question was asked by a count who was interested in finding out if the gold standard was abandoned because it cannot work in a democracy. And right off the bat, I want to say that the gold standard was abandoned for a wide range of reasons, and many of them revolve around the fact that it wasn't perceived as flexible enough. Now, of course, nowadays, people, when they see how much money has been quote-unquote printed through various monetary easing programs such as quantitative easing in the United States and similar programs in the European Union, Japan, and whatever, when they see this, a lot of people say, yeah, we should go back to the gold standard because that way at least politicians cannot print recklessly. And they do have a point to a certain extent. All in all, I personally believe that the name of the game is finding the right balance between a monetary system that's flexible enough so as not to cause deflationary death spirals, but at the same time, one that keeps politicians in check and somehow minimizes the chance of doing the exact opposite and heading towards inflation and ultimately hyperinflation. So yeah, that's the name of the game, and the gold standard, even if it has many pros, even if it's awesome that, it's backed by something tangible, gold, by something that has had value for a long time, it has pros as well, but it's not perfect. There are many options to choose from. Maybe at the end of the day, we'll end up with a monetary system that is backed by something tangible. It's just that I wouldn't be 100% sure that we're going to choose gold. So, for example, back in the hyperinflationary days of the Weimar Republic, initially, a monetary system based not on gold, but on real estate was chosen. And that, again, just like gold, real estate is something tangible. It's something that has, a lot going for itself in terms of desirability. So there's an option. Maybe, who knows, in the future, monetary systems will be backed by baskets of tangible and perhaps even intangible assets. Who knows? The bottom line is that I can agree that the current system does make it tempting for politicians to fire up the printing presses, but then again, going back to a pure gold standard might not be the best idea either. And for today's final question, Bill wants to know if he should invest in real estate as he gets older because it's easier to pass on. Personally, I stay away from absolutes in that I don't tell people you should invest in real estate, you should invest in stocks, you should invest in Bitcoin, or anything else for that matter. Instead, I would rephrase your question a bit and answer by saying that yes, you should also invest in real estate because it's easy to pass on. And that the name of the game, as far as I'm concerned, is diversifying, but of course within reason. So it does make sense, even if you're young, to think about what your family will do after your death. And all in all, it's important to achieve the right balance between return maximization on the one hand and predictability on the other. Of course, from strictly the perspective of passing on your wealth to the next generation, things like gold or real estate that are extremely easy to leave behind make a lot of sense. But then again, this doesn't mean that when you're young, you should ignore assets such as cryptocurrencies or, perhaps other exotic vehicles just because they are harder to pass on. No, I think there's plenty of room in your portfolio for conservative assets as well as exotic ones. And that ultimately, even if you have Bitcoin, even if you have stocks across 50 brokerage accounts. It's still possible to be smart about leaving wealth behind, and that, okay, while it's not as easy as with real estate, you can simply put together a detailed list and tell people, only open this when I'm gone, and when they do open it, you're going to explain from A to Z everything you own, how they can access your Bitcoins, how many brokerage accounts you have and how they can access those, things like that. So if you're smart about it, I do believe there's room in your portfolio for a wide range of assets. That's it for today, guys. Thanks a lot for tuning in to yet another edition of 1 Minute Answers from 1 Minute Economics. And remember, 1, if you can, please give me 5 seconds of your time by heading over to 1minuteeconomics.com and typing in your email address so that we can keep in touch. I promise I will not spam you, and I'll only let you know if I have something really important to announce, like the launch of a new book. 2, the topic for next week is consumerism, so feel free to ask me anything about the economics of consumerism, the sustainability of consumerism, and so on. As always, please like my videos, be active in the community, and subscribe to 1 Minute Economics if you haven't by now. And of course, those who want to and can afford to can also support the channel financially by buying my Wealth Management 2.0 book or by donating through PayPal, Patreon, or Bitcoin. For more information, head on over to 1minuteeconomics.com. Thanks a lot, guys, and have an awesome weekend.